Thrown out in the rain like trash by the CEO's cruel mother, a heartbroken maid vanished, carrying his twins in her womb. 6 years later, fate drags her back into the same mansion. But this time, she's no servant. She's the woman who'll make them all kneel for what they did to her. Tell me, where are you tuning in from today? I love knowing where my amazing audience is listening from around the world. Before we begin, make sure you hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and stay with me till the very end, because this story will touch your heart and keep you hooked till the last word. All right, grab your headphones, settle in, and let's dive straight into today's story. Get out, CEO's mom shouted, not knowing she was pregnant with his twins until 6 years later. The Kingston mansion shimmered under the noonday light, its marble floors gleaming like glass, reflecting chandeliers that hung from golden ceilings. Every corner screamed of power and perfection, except for the small, trembling figure in the center of the hall. Romana's hands clutched the mop so tightly that her knuckles turned pale, her breath catching as the air filled with venomous words. "Get out of my house, you filthy maid!" Mrs. Kingston's voice boomed like thunder, slicing through the stillness, her face twisted with disgust, the wrinkles around her mouth deepening with every hateful word. The old woman stood there, draped in luxury, her diamond necklace shimmering like ice, as she looked down upon the trembling young woman who dared to exist in her perfect world. Romana's heart pounded violently, her ears ringing as humiliation washed over her in waves so strong it nearly broke her knees. The marble beneath her feet felt like it was made of knives. Each glare from the servants who peeked from the corners burned her like silent judgment. Her vision blurred, not from the shine of the chandeliers, but from the hot tears that refused to stay hidden. Mrs. Kingston's voice carried on, cruel and commanding. "I warned you to know your place, but you dared to touch what doesn't belong to you." Her words dripped with venom, and Romana's chest tightened as the truth she could never reveal throbbed inside her. The old woman had no idea that her son, her precious, perfect heir, had been the one who had sought Romana out that fateful night. The night that changed everything. Romana's lips parted, wanting to speak, to explain, but fear chained her tongue. Her heart screamed words her mouth couldn't form. "It wasn't like that. I didn't mean for it to happen." But Mrs. Kingston wasn't listening. She never listened. To her, Romana was nothing but dirt under her shoes. "I should have known you'd bring shame to this house," the woman hissed. "Pack your things. I never want to see your face again." Her voice echoed through the grand hallway, bouncing off the marble columns, louder than Romana's pounding heart. The mansion suddenly felt colder, emptier, as if it had rejected her entirely. Romana's trembling hands clutched her ragged apron, trying to keep her composure. Her chest heaved and her eyes fell to the floor, but her mind was somewhere else, back in the quiet shadows of the guest wing 6 weeks ago, when Martin Kingston had stumbled into the servants' quarters, his eyes glassy from wine, but gentle in their gaze. That night, he wasn't the arrogant heir. He had whispered her name like it meant something. His touch had been soft, uncertain, human. And now, standing before his mother's fury, Romana's stomach twisted at the thought of the secret she carried, the proof of that night living quietly beneath her heart. Mrs. Kingston's hand shot out suddenly, grabbing Romana's arm, yanking her toward the door. "Out!" she shouted again, her rings cutting into Romana's skin. The humiliation seared deeper than pain. The servants averted their eyes, pretending not to see, as if her suffering were contagious. The sound of the heavy oak door opening echoed like a sentence passed. Romana stumbled forward, clutching the edge of her shawl, her tears mixing with the first drops of rain that began to fall outside. The grey sky mirrored her heart, heavy, threatening to break open. As the door slammed behind her, the echo lingered, cruel and final. The world outside was cold and merciless. Thunder rolled in the distance, and lightning flashed, illuminating the driveway where she had once walked in with dreams of stability, maybe even love. Now she stood barefoot on the cold stone steps, the rain soaking through her thin uniform, her hair plastered to her cheeks. She looked up at the massive mansion, the place that had been her prison, her hope, her heartbreak, and whispered through trembling lips, "You can throw me out, but you can't break me." Her voice was weak, but inside her chest, something fierce began to stir. She stumbled down the long path, the wind whipping against her face, carrying whispers of memories. Martin's deep voice, murmuring her name that night, the warmth of his arms, the way he had looked at her as though she wasn't invisible. A small flicker of warmth pierced through her despair, but then reality crashed in. He was gone. She was alone. And yet, as her hand instinctively brushed over her stomach, she felt something strange, a flutter, a pulse that wasn't hers. "I'll protect you," she whispered to the storm, her voice barely audible over the roaring wind. "I'll protect both of you." The rain came harder, soaking her clothes, but she didn't stop walking. Each step away from the Kingston estate felt like tearing herself from the past, from shame, from betrayal. Her tears blended with the rain until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Her mind replayed every cruel word, every glare, every door slammed in her face. And then Martin's voice, the one she'd never forget. "You're not just a maid tonight, Romana. You're my peace." She had believed him, foolishly, completely. That memory hurt more than the cold. It burned her from the inside, but it also kept her going. She reached the old iron gates at the edge of the property and turned back one last time. The mansion stood tall and proud, glowing through the storm like a monster that devoured the weak and thrived on pride. Its windows flickered with light, but to Romana it looked lifeless, a hollow shell filled with riches but empty of soul. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "You'll remember me one day, Mrs. Kingston. You'll remember the woman you called filthy when she stood stronger than you ever could." Her words vanished into the wind, but her resolve solidified like steel beneath her fragile exterior. She wrapped her shawl tighter and began walking down the long, deserted road, each step echoing with purpose. The sound of thunder grew closer, but instead of fear, it felt like an anthem, a warning to the world that something powerful had just awakened. Her wet hair clung to her neck, her body shivering, but her heart was burning. Every drop of rain that hit her face felt like a baptism, washing away her shame, her fear, her dependence. The mansion lights behind her dimmed into distant specks like dying stars. She found shelter beneath a bus stop canopy, her breath coming in shaky sobs as she pressed her hand against her stomach again. "I don't know how I'll do this," she whispered, voice cracking. "But I will. I'll keep you safe. You'll never need to beg like I did. You'll never be treated like less." Her tears fell freely now, but they weren't only tears of pain, they were the birth of a vow. The soft patter of rain seemed to echo her heartbeat. She had lost everything, and yet she carried everything that mattered within her. Lightning streaked across the sky, briefly illuminating her face. Young, beautiful despite the bruises of sorrow, with eyes that now held something fierce. The world had pushed her down, but something inside refused to break. She pulled her knees to her chest and whispered into the dark, "One day I'll come back. But not as a maid. I'll return with power, and you'll see me again, not to serve you, but to stand above everything you tried to destroy." The words felt foreign, yet powerful on her tongue, almost prophetic. As the rain softened, she rose again, wrapping her soaked shawl tighter, her silhouette framed against the grey morning light. Her steps were slower now, but sure. The cold bit at her, but the fire within burned brighter. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn blared, a dog barked, and life went on, uncaring. But for Romana, everything had changed. Her heart carried two tiny heartbeats now, silent promises of a future she couldn't yet imagine, but already loved with her entire soul. She took one last look at the horizon and whispered to the storm, "You can throw me out, but you'll never erase me." Her voice, soft yet steady, was swallowed by the wind, but it carried the weight of destiny. Her pain had been planted like a seed that would one day grow into power. The wind howled louder, the thunder rolled again, and the screen of the storm became her curtain call, one life ending, another beginning. As she disappeared into the rain-soaked night, the world seemed to hold its breath. The mansion stood silent, unaware that it had just lost the woman who would one day bring its walls to their knees. Far away, in the warmth of the mansion's study, Martin Kingston stirred in his sleep, a strange unease in his chest, as if his soul sensed what his mind couldn't remember. The woman walking away from his world tonight carried his future in her womb. And somewhere in the darkness, Romana whispered again, "You'll see me rise." The storm had long passed, but its memory lingered in Romana's veins. The night she walked away from the Kingston mansion became the night she learned how to live without belonging anywhere. The wind that had once howled around her now whispered like an old friend, reminding her that survival wasn't about strength, it was about refusing to stay broken. The world didn't open its arms for her, it turned its back. But she faced it anyway, with nothing but courage stitched into her heart and two tiny lives growing quietly within her. 6 years slipped by like pages in a worn diary, each one soaked in tears, sweat, and small triumphs no one celebrated but her. She remembered every winter night she went hungry so her sons could eat, every morning she woke before dawn to scrub the floors of strangers, her hands raw but her spirit unyielding. The city was cruel to women like her, single, forgotten, nameless. But she didn't need pity. She needed progress. She built her life brick by invisible brick, learning to turn every insult into motivation, every scar into armor. The Romana of 6 years ago had been fragile, soft-spoken, too kind for a world that feasted on kindness. The Romana, now staring back at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, had eyes that glowed with quiet power. The curve of her lips no longer trembled. It smiled with knowing patience. She tied her dark hair into a loose bun, adjusted the collar of her plain uniform, and took a deep breath before waking the two little miracles who had given her every reason to fight. "Leo, Jack, wake up! Sunshine's waiting," she whispered softly, her voice filled with warmth. The small, cozy room came to life as two sleepy faces peeked from under a blanket, identical smiles spreading across their faces. Leo yawned dramatically while Jack giggled, his little hand reaching for his mother's cheek. They had Martin's eyes, that deep hazel that shimmered with light whenever they laughed, and every time Romana looked at them, she felt her heart twist between love and heartbreak. They were the living proof of a night she could never forget yet never speak about. Breakfast was simple, oatmeal and milk, but in their tiny apartment, it tasted like victory. "Mama, are we rich yet?" Leo asked, his spoon clinking against the bowl. Romana laughed softly, ruffling his hair. "We're rich in love, baby, and that's better." Jack chimed in, "But love doesn't buy new shoes." His tone was innocent, and she smiled, hiding the sting his words caused. Her boys deserved more comfort, more safety, more than the world had given her. But she knew this. They'd never feel unloved. After dropping them off at school, she hurried to her second job at a local diner. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, tying her apron and greeting her co-workers with her usual smile, the one that hid exhaustion like a mask. "Romana, double shift again?" the manager asked, glancing at her with pity. "Bills don't pay themselves," she replied, picking up the tray. The aroma of coffee and pancakes filled the air, and she moved through the chaos gracefully, a quiet storm of efficiency and charm. Customers adored her kindness, never guessing the battle scars beneath her calm exterior. When night fell, she worked on her small dream, a candle-making business she ran from her kitchen. Each candle she poured carried a piece of her resilience, the soft scents filling the apartment with hope. Slowly, customers began to notice her craftsmanship. Orders trickled in, then doubled, then spread by word of mouth. "You make magic, Mama," Jack told her one evening, his eyes wide as he watched her pour wax into molds. Romana smiled, her heart swelling. "No, sweetheart. I just make light out of darkness." Those words became her secret mantra, and with that light, she built something real, her very own catering company. It began small, serving at birthdays and small corporate lunches, but her dedication and flavor turned heads. Her dishes carried not just spices, but stories, love, and pride. "One day," she whispered to herself as she packed her supplies into a borrowed van, "I'll cook for people who once thought I was beneath them." The dream didn't come from revenge. It came from dignity, from wanting her sons to see their mother as more than a survivor. One afternoon, as she waited outside the school gates, Leo ran toward her, waving his report card proudly. "Mama, I got first place in science," he exclaimed. Jack followed close behind, holding a drawing of their little family under a bright sun. Romana crouched down, hugging them tightly. Their laughter filled the air, echoing through her soul like music. In moments like these, she realized how far she'd come, from a drenched girl on a cold night to a mother who built a home from love and willpower. Yet sometimes when she tucked them in, she'd stare at their faces in the dim lamplight and feel an ache she couldn't silence. Would Martin recognize them if he saw them? Would he even remember her name? After they slept, she often sat by the window, the city's lights flickering like distant stars, and thought about the past she never escaped. Her hand would drift toward the drawer beside her bed, a drawer that held one envelope, yellowed and heavy with truth. Inside was the DNA report she had taken when the twins turned 2, the one she could never open. The paper's edges were worn from her fingers, but the seal remained unbroken. "Not yet," she'd whisper each time, her chest tightening. "Not until I'm ready to face the past." Life had taught her to wait for her moment, and that moment was coming closer than she knew. One night, as she was closing her laptop after balancing the catering company's finances, her phone buzzed with an email. She clicked it absently, expecting another order for a small party, but her breath caught as her eyes scanned the screen. The sender's name glowed in bold letters, Kingston Group Events. Her pulse quickened, her throat tightening as she read the invitation. "We are pleased to invite Romana's Culinary Creations to cater the Kingston Foundation Charity Gala." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Fate had finally come knocking. Her hands trembled as she clutched the phone, disbelief flooding her. The same mansion that had thrown her out was now requesting her presence, not as a servant, but as a business owner. The irony was almost too much to bear. She laughed softly, a sound half joy, half nerves. "Is this how destiny works?" she whispered, her reflection shimmering in the window pane. The city lights blinked back at her like knowing eyes. A part of her wanted to decline, to stay hidden from the ghosts of her past. But another part, the fire that had carried her this far, refused to back down. She looked over at her sleeping boys, their small bodies curled under the blanket, and felt her purpose return. "You'll see where your mama came from," she murmured, brushing a curl from Leo's forehead. "You'll see what strength looks like." The candle on her nightstand flickered, its flame bending but not breaking, just like her. In the days that followed, preparations consumed her life. She stayed up late, designing menus, testing recipes, and ironing uniforms for her small team. Her employees adored her, a leader who treated them like family. "This is our biggest event yet," her assistant Mira said one morning, eyes wide with excitement. Romana nodded, concealing the storm inside her. "Yes," she said softly, "the biggest, and the most personal." Each night before bed, she found herself glancing at that drawer again. The envelope seemed to whisper her name, daring her to open it. One night, curiosity almost won. She held the letter between trembling fingers, feeling its weight, the truth inside pressing against her conscience. But then she saw her boy's drawings on the wall, two smiling stick figures beside her own, and she put it back. "The truth can wait," she said, a bittersweet smile forming. "Right now, I have to show the world who Romana really is." The morning of the event arrived like a sunrise after a long winter. Romana stood before the mirror, her catering uniform crisp and neat, her hair tied back elegantly. She looked powerful. Not the maid who had once scrubbed those same floors, but a woman reborn through struggle. As she zipped her bag and gathered her team, her heart beat faster, not out of fear, but out of destiny. She could almost hear the echo of Mrs. Kingston's cruel command, "Get out of my house, you filthy maid," and she smiled faintly. "Oh, I'm coming back," she whispered, "but not as a maid, as the woman who will change everything." As she locked the door behind her, her son's laughter echoed faintly through the apartment, unaware that their mother was about to walk into the same mansion that had shaped their fate before they were even born. The catering van's headlights sliced through the night as Romana's eyes reflected a mix of fear and fire. The Kingston name had once broken her, but now it would witness her rise. At the Kingston mansion, preparations for the grand gala glittered under chandeliers, and somewhere deep inside, Mrs. Kingston's intuition prickled. Something was coming. As Romana's van pulled up before the massive iron gates of the Kingston estate, her breath hitched. The very gates that had closed behind her 6 years ago were opening again. This time, for her. 3. The night air was crisp, carrying a hint of winter as the catering van rolled to a stop before the towering iron gates of the Kingston estate. Romana's fingers tightened around the steering wheel, her pulse racing faster than it had in years. The gates loomed before her like the very jaws of fate, black, elegant, and unforgiving. She could still remember the sound they made when they had closed behind her 6 years ago, sealing her exile. Tonight they were opening again, their slow creak echoing through the night like the turning of destiny's gears. Her sons sat quietly in the back seat, their innocent faces filled with curiosity, unaware that the mansion ahead was not just another client's house, it was the place where their mother's heart had once shattered. "Wow, Mama," Jack whispered, pressing his tiny hands against the window. "It's like a castle." Leo's eyes widened as the golden lights of the mansion flickered through the trees. "Do rich people really live like this every day?" Romana smiled faintly, though her chest ached. "Some do," she said softly, "but not all of them are happy." Her words hung heavy in the silence as the van rolled over the familiar stone driveway. The mansion came into full view, tall, grand, untouchable. It looked exactly as it had that night she was thrown out, except now she saw it differently. It wasn't home. It was history. As the van came to a stop, her catering team began unloading trays and equipment, their chatter filling the air with nervous excitement. "Romana, this place is incredible," Mira whispered, her assistant's eyes wide with admiration. Romana forced a calm smile, concealing the storm inside her. "Focus on the service," she reminded gently. "We're not guests here. We're professionals." But inside, her heart beat in 2 rhythms, one for the woman she had become, and one for the girl who had once cried in this driveway under the rain. She helped her boys out of the van, smoothing their tiny suits and straightening their ties. "Stay close to me," she whispered. "No running off, all right?" Leo nodded eagerly, while Jack grinned. "Are we going to meet fancy people?" Romana chuckled softly. "Maybe," she said. "Just remember to smile." She looked at them for a moment longer, her heart swelling with pride. They were her everything, her proof that love could grow even from pain. As she approached the grand front doors, her heels clicked against the marble like a steady drumbeat of courage. Each step felt heavy, layered with memory, the same steps she had once been pushed down, the same threshold she had crossed in humiliation. But tonight she wasn't a maid carrying a mop. She was a businesswoman leading her team. Her uniform was replaced by a tailored black dress and pearl earrings, her posture unyielding. The woman who once served now stood to be served respect. Inside, the mansion gleamed under golden chandeliers, its air perfumed with wealth and ego. Familiar portraits lined the walls, Kingstons of generations past, staring down with the same cold arrogance she remembered. The marble floor reflected her figure as she entered, her reflection stronger than the shadow that had once trembled there. For a fleeting second, she could almost see her younger self in that reflection, the girl holding a mop, her eyes red from tears, and she whispered under her breath, "You made it." "Excuse me," called a voice from behind. Romana turned to see a housekeeper approach, a new one, young and polite. "Are you the catering head?" Romana nodded, her tone firm but kind. "Yes, Romana Hayes, owner of Culinary Creations." The woman blinked, surprised. "Owner? Oh," the event coordinator said, "your food's reputation is exceptional." Romana offered a professional smile. "Let's hope it lives up to the mansion's standards," she replied, though her eyes carried a deeper meaning. As she walked toward the ballroom, a strange stillness filled her chest. The last time she had stood here, she had been crying. Tonight she carried her own success in her hands, yet her heart whispered, "Someone in this house still remembers you." The event was in full swing, crystal glasses clinking, laughter echoing, expensive perfume floating through the air. Guests in suits and gowns mingled, oblivious to the storm quietly brewing near the buffet table. Romana moved through the room gracefully, directing her staff, ensuring every detail was perfect. Yet she couldn't ignore the faint tremor in her hands. Every sound, every face reminded her of ghosts she had buried 6 years ago. And then she saw her, Mrs. Kingston. Standing across the ballroom, regal and composed, dressed in silver silk and diamonds, the matriarch of the family turned, and her eyes froze. Her face drained of color, the blood retreating from her cheeks as if she'd seen a spirit rise from the grave. The glass of champagne in her hand trembled. For a brief moment, neither woman moved. The noise of the gala faded into silence, replaced by the sound of memory. "Get out of my house, you filthy maid!" echoing in both their minds. Romana straightened her shoulders, calm yet fierce. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but living it felt surreal. The older woman took a hesitant step forward, her lips parting. "You?" she breathed, voice cracking under disbelief. You're still alive." Romana's expression didn't waver. "Alive," she said quietly, "and thriving." Mrs. Kingston's eyes darted to the catering logo on the staff's uniforms, Romana's name embroidered elegantly. "You," she repeated, her voice trembling between fury and shock. "You own this." Romana's lips curved into a cool smile, the kind that carried years of silent victory. "Didn't expect your maid to own the business, did you?" The words landed like lightning, striking the air between them. Mrs. Kingston stumbled back slightly, her composure cracking. For the first time, the woman who once stood above Romana now looked smaller, uncertain, human. And for the first time, Romana didn't feel anger. She felt power. But before Mrs. Kingston could respond, a voice from behind interrupted. Deep, smooth, commanding. "Mother, what's going on?" The sound froze Romana mid-breath. That voice. It rolled through her like a forgotten melody that once made her heart race. Slowly she turned. There he was, Martin Kingston. He stood at the edge of the ballroom, tall and devastatingly handsome in a tailored black suit. His dark hair swept back, his eyes as sharp and unreadable as ever. 6 years had only refined him. The boyish charm replaced by the authority of a man who owned every room he walked into. But beneath the polished exterior, something flickered when his gaze found her. Their eyes met. The noise of the party disappeared. The lights dimmed. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. Romana's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear anything else. His eyes widened with confusion, first curiosity, then disbelief, as recognition began to dawn. "Romana," he murmured, her name escaping his lips like a ghost he thought he'd buried. Her throat tightened. The sound of his voice, after all these years, was like fire meeting ice, familiar, dangerous, irresistible. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to run. But she stood her ground, forcing her heart to obey her will. "Mr. Kingston," she greeted, her tone calm, professional, guarded. He took a slow step closer, his brows furrowing. You're the head caterer." "The owner," she corrected softly, her chin lifting with quiet pride. "Of Romana's culinary creations." The air thickened between them, charged with everything unspoken. Mrs. Kingston shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between them, realizing with dread that her past cruelty might now be her undoing. The faintest trace of emotion flickered in Martin's eyes. Confusion, maybe admiration, maybe something deeper. But before he could speak, 2 small voices cut through the tension. "Mama!" Romana turned instantly, her composure softening as her twins ran toward her, their little suits slightly rumpled from playing near the dessert table. Leo clutched her hand, while Jack peeked curiously at the elegant man standing beside Mrs. Kingston. "Mama, who's that?" Martin's gaze dropped to the boys, and in that instant, everything inside him shifted. His breath caught, his mind froze, his heartbeat stuttered. 2 sets of hazel eyes stared back at him. His eyes, 2 identical smiles, his smile. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as realization began to dawn. He took an involuntary step closer, his face pale as the truth hit him like a thunderclap. The chandeliers above flickered as if sensing the storm about to break. The guests around them continued to laugh and sip champagne, oblivious to the silent chaos unraveling in the corner of the room. Romana's lips pressed together, her eyes holding his. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The resemblance was undeniable, the truth too powerful to hide. The air between them crackled like lightning before a storm. Martin's voice came out low, trembling, barely above a whisper. Who are they?" Romana's hand tightened around her son's, her chin lifted, her voice steady, proud, unflinching. "Your sons." The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. Mrs. Kingston's face went white as porcelain, her champagne glass slipping from her trembling fingers and shattering on the marble floor. The sound echoed through the hall like a gunshot, silencing every laugh, every conversation. Martin's jaw clenched, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief, his gaze flicking from Romana to the boys and back. His world had just tilted upside down. The twins stared up at the man who looked exactly like them, innocent and curious. The room held its breath as Martin's voice broke through the silence, soft, disbelieving, trembling. My sons." The ballroom had fallen into a stunned silence, the kind that carries the weight of too many secrets. Every flicker of light from the chandelier seemed to hesitate mid-glow, as if even the universe refused to interrupt the moment. Martin Kingston stood frozen, his breath uneven, his heart pounding with a sound only he could hear. Before him stood two little boys, their faces innocent, their eyes wide and curious, eyes that mirrored his own reflection so perfectly it felt like looking into a living memory of his childhood. Leo smiled shyly, his small hand still clutching Romana's. Jack tilted his head, curiosity sparkling in his gaze, the same boyish expression Martin used to wear when his father caught him sneaking cookies in the kitchen. Martin's throat tightened painfully. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. But the truth stared right back at him through the twins' eyes. Who are they? He managed to whisper, though he already knew the answer. His voice cracked at the edges, stripped of the control and confidence he was known for. Romana met his gaze, her chin lifting with quiet pride and unshaken calm. "Your sons," she said simply, her voice steady as if she had rehearsed it in her heart 1,000 times. The words exploded through the room like thunder. Gasps rippled among the guests, and the soft melody playing in the background stuttered into silence. Someone's glass slipped from their fingers, shattering against marble. Mrs. Kingston's teacup fell and broke into porcelain pieces, the sound echoing through the stunned air like a final judgment. Martin's breath hitched as he stumbled back a step, eyes darting from Romana to the children and back again, searching for something, proof, denial, anything that could make this not true. But the twins only blinked up at him, their expressions open, innocent, unknowing. They didn't understand that they had just ripped open 6 years of buried secrets. "That's impossible," Martin whispered, shaking his head. "It can't be." Romana's voice cut through the tension, calm but sharp. "It's not impossible, Martin. It's the truth." She reached into her clutch and pulled out a single white folder, the same one that had lived in her drawer for years, the one she had promised herself she would use only when she was strong enough to face the consequences. Her fingers trembled only slightly as she held it out to him. "You want proof?" she said softly. "You deserve to see it." Martin stared at the folder as if it were a ticking bomb. Slowly, almost mechanically, he took it from her hands. The moment his fingers brushed hers, something electric passed between them. A memory, a ghost of warmth, the echo of a night neither of them could forget. His chest tightened, breath coming shallow as he opened the folder. The sound of paper rustling filled the silent ballroom, every eye fixed on him as he began to read. Each second stretched endlessly, the tension so sharp it could cut glass. Martin's eyes moved over the document once, twice, and then stopped cold. The color drained from his face. His grip on the folder faltered. The DNA test results glared back at him, unrelenting, scientific, undeniable. His name was printed clearly beside the words, "Paternity confirmed, 99.99%. For a moment he couldn't move, couldn't speak. The words blurred before his eyes as the past slammed into him all at once. The memory of Romana's laughter that night, the way her hair had smelled like jasmine, the way she had trembled in his arms, the way he had whispered her name like a prayer. He had been drunk, yes, but not blind. He had felt something that night, something he had buried and forced himself to forget when his mother's lies had come between them. A flash of that night filled his mind, her tears glistening under moonlight, his hand brushing them away, his whispered promise, "You're safe with me, Romana." And now, looking at her, he realized he had broken that promise without even knowing it. Martin lifted his gaze slowly, his eyes glassy with disbelief and something deeper, regret. "Romana," he breathed, his voice trembling as if the word itself hurt. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question sliced through the silence, raw and aching. Romana's heart thudded painfully, but her expression didn't falter. Would you have believed me? She asked quietly. 6 years ago, your mother threw me out like I was dirt. You never came. You never asked. He flinched. The truth landed harder than any accusation. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear I didn't. Mother told me you left on your own, that you stole from the house. Romana's lips twitched into a bitter, humorless smile. Of course she did. It was easier to believe her than to ask me, wasn't it? The crowd began to murmur softly, their whispers snaking through the tension like smoke. Some recognized her name from the catering company's rising fame. Others remembered the scandal from years ago, the maid who disappeared overnight. Now the truth stood in front of them, undeniable and poetic. Mrs. Kingston's voice suddenly cut through the air, trembling with fury. "This is absurd," she snapped. "You're trying to trap my son again, aren't you? How dare you bring this circus into my home?" Romana turned to face her, her expression sharp but composed. "I didn't come here to expose anyone," she said firmly. "I came here to do my job." Fate decided the rest. Martin's gaze never left the twins. They stood close to their mother, holding onto her skirt, confused but calm. Leo tilted his head, his small voice breaking the heavy silence. "Mama, is that man angry with us?" Romana knelt down, cupping his cheek gently. "No, sweetheart," she said softly. "He's just surprised." Her voice wavered only slightly, but Martin heard the strain. Jack blinked up at him, curiosity replacing fear. "You look like us," he said with a grin. The innocence in his tone shattered the last of Martin's composure. His eyes burned as he knelt to meet them at eye level, his voice hoarse. "You have my eyes," he whispered. Romana's breath hitched as she watched him reach out, hesitant, trembling, his fingers brushing through Jack's hair as if to confirm that this was real, that these boys weren't ghosts from some cruel dream. Mrs. Kingston took a sharp step forward, her face pale with panic. "Martin, stop this nonsense. She's manipulating you." But Martin didn't move. His voice was low, but firm. "Mother, stop." The authority in his tone made the room fall silent again. He looked up at Romana, eyes glistening. "All this time, all these years, and I never knew." Romana stood tall, her eyes shimmering but resolute. "You were never meant to," she said softly. "I didn't want your pity. I just wanted peace." He shook his head slowly, almost in disbelief. "Peace? You think I could ever have peace, knowing I missed their first steps, their first words?" His voice cracked, pain raw in every syllable. The twins looked between them, sensing the storm beneath the calm. Leo tugged at Romana's hand. "Mama," he whispered, "why is everyone staring at us?" Romana forced a smile, her voice barely steady. "Because, darling," she said, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead, "you just changed a lot of things tonight." The ballroom's energy shifted again, heavy with emotion. Martin rose slowly to his feet, his jaw tightening with determination. The businessman, the son, the man who had built an empire out of logic and order, was now face to face with the one thing he couldn't control, his heart. He turned toward his mother, his tone sharp, commanding. "You lied to me." Mrs. Kingston froze. I protected you." "No," he said, his voice trembling but firm. "You destroyed the one thing that could have made me happy." His words struck like thunder, echoing through the hall. Guests turned away, pretending not to watch, but no one could look elsewhere. Romana stood quietly, her eyes glistening, torn between vindication and pain. She hadn't come for revenge, yet fate had delivered it anyway. Martin looked back at her, his voice breaking once more. "Romana, I would have found you. I would have been there." She shook her head gently. "Maybe. But sometimes love isn't enough to fight the walls people build around us." The air between them shimmered with tension and old affection, the kind that never truly dies. Martin took a hesitant step closer, his eyes filled with 1,000 unspoken apologies. "Let me try now," he whispered, voice rough with emotion. Romana's breath caught, torn between the fire in his words and the years of silence that separated them. The twins looked up at both parents, their innocent eyes the bridge between past and future. The chandelier light flickered softly as Martin's lips parted, trembling with the question that would decide everything. "Romana, why didn't you tell me?" And just like that, the world around them held its breath again. The silence that followed Martin's trembling question seemed to burn through the walls of the grand ballroom. Every chandelier crystal caught the flicker of emotion in his eyes, reflecting a storm he could no longer contain. Romana stood rooted in place, her heart pounding against her ribs like it wanted to escape the pain she had buried for years. Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice, strong, controlled, almost regal, did not waver. "Tell you?" she repeated, her tone shaking not from weakness, but from years of suppressed fire. "Tell you, after your mother threw me out like trash? After I begged for a chance to explain and she slammed the door in my face?" Her words hit him like blades, slicing through the fog of disbelief that still lingered around him. Every syllable carried the weight of nights she had cried herself to sleep, clutching the small hands of her newborns, wondering how love could turn so cruel so quickly. Martin's face twisted in agony, his composure fracturing as the truth tore at his carefully built world. He looked toward his mother, once the symbol of everything stable, everything untouchable, and now she looked small, fragile, guilty. "Mother." His voice cracked, the word barely more than a whisper, yet filled with disbelief. "Is that true?" The guests, still frozen, turned toward Mrs. Kingston. The woman who had commanded fear and respect for decades stood pale under the scrutiny, her fingers tightening around her pearls. "I did what I had to do," she murmured, but her tone lacked its usual steel. The cracks in her mask were showing. Martin took a step closer, his anger simmering beneath grief. "What you had to do," he repeated, the disbelief in his voice cutting through the heavy air. "You lied to me. You destroyed her life, our life, because of your pride." Mrs. Kingston's lips trembled, the first sign of weakness anyone had ever seen in her. "She was a maid, Martin. A maid who dared to love my son. I had to protect our name." Romana flinched, but lifted her chin proudly, her eyes glistening with both sorrow and defiance. "You mean you had to protect your control," she said sharply. "You didn't care who you hurt, as long as your world stayed perfect." Her voice echoed through the hall, and for the first time, the crowd seemed to side with her. The guests, once whispering in scandal, now watched in uneasy silence, their judgment shifting from her to the woman who had orchestrated everything. Martin's jaw tightened, and for the first time in his life, he saw his mother not as a figure of authority, but as the architect of his greatest loss. "You didn't protect me," he said, voice low and trembling. "You made sure I would never know happiness." Mrs. Kingston's eyes glistened, but pride kept her silent. Martin turned back to Romana, the guilt in his eyes raw and unfiltered. "Romana, all this time, I thought you were gone by choice." Romana's chest rose and fell rapidly. "You believed her, Martin," she whispered, tears spilling freely now. "You believed I was a thief. You believed I used you." Martin's expression broke, his mask of strength crumbling. He took a hesitant step closer, as if closing the physical distance could undo 6 years of separation. "I didn't know what to believe," he confessed. "I searched for you. I tried, but every lead went cold." She shook her head gently, her voice low but filled with quiet heartbreak. "No, Martin. You stopped searching long before the truth could find you." The air between them pulsed with grief and unspoken longing. The twins, Leo and Jack, clung tighter to their mother's dress, their small faces etched with confusion. They could feel the tension, the sorrow, but they didn't yet understand the story, written in the silence. Martin looked down at them, his chest tightening painfully as realization sank deeper with every heartbeat. "They're mine," he whispered, as if saying the words aloud made them more real. His hand trembled as he reached out, pausing just before touching Leo's shoulder, afraid that one blink might make them disappear like a dream. Leo's small hand reached forward, curling instinctively around Martin's finger. The contact broke something deep inside him. His heart, his pride, his guilt. A tear slipped down his cheek as Jack watched curiously, stepping closer to mimic his brother. "They're mine," Martin repeated, the words now heavier, deeper, sacred. "I missed 5 years of their lives." His voice cracked as he said it, and Romana turned away, unable to meet his eyes. "You missed more than that," she whispered. "You missed the nights they cried for a father they didn't know, the mornings they asked why other kids had 2 parents. You missed the birthdays I couldn't afford to celebrate properly." Her voice trembled, but she refused to crumble. "You missed their first words, Martin. Their first steps, their first smiles, and every single time they asked if you were coming home, I had to lie." The confession hung between them, thick and suffocating. The pain in her words pressed against his chest like a vice, crushing what little strength he had left. "Romana," he whispered, stepping forward. But she took a step back, her eyes swimming with tears. "Don't," she said softly. "Don't come closer. Not when your mother's lies still live in the space between us." Mrs. Kingston trembled, her defenses collapsing under the weight of her son's gaze. "I thought I was saving you," she said weakly, her voice cracking. "You were young, foolish. She was beneath you, beneath me," Martin snapped, anger sparking through his grief. "She was the only one who ever saw me for who I was. Not for my name, not for my money, but for me." He turned to Romana again, his eyes filled with remorse. "And I let her slip away." Romana's lips parted, the pain in her chest too sharp to contain. "You didn't just let me slip away," she whispered. "You let me fall, and you never looked back." The words shattered something inside him. He dropped to one knee before her, his pride gone, his voice breaking. "I can't change the past," he said, looking up at her through tear-filled eyes. "But let me make it right. Please." The twins watched him, their innocent gazes flickering between their mother and the man who suddenly looked both strong and broken. Leo reached for Romana's hand. "Mama, why is he crying?" he asked softly. Romana brushed her tears quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Because," she said gently, "sometimes grown-ups remember things too late." Martin's heart clenched at her words. "Not too late," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I still have time, if you'll let me." Romana's breath caught. For the first time, his tone didn't sound like the confident CEO she once knew. It sounded like the man she fell in love with, stripped of everything but truth. The room seemed to fade around them, leaving only the weight of their shared past and the fragile hope of what might come next. Romana's hands trembled as she looked down at her sons, their tiny fingers clutching her dress. They were the living proof of a love story stolen by lies, yet standing here, face to face with the man who never knew, she could feel something long buried stirring inside her, a spark, faint but real. Martin reached forward slowly, his fingers brushing Leo's hair as if to memorize the texture. "I missed their first laugh," he said brokenly. "I missed tucking them in, reading to them, being their father. But if you give me a chance, Romana, I'll spend the rest of my life making up for it." The sincerity in his tone silenced even the whispers. Romana blinked back tears, her walls cracking just enough for vulnerability to slip through. "And what about your mother?" she asked softly. "What will you do when she forces you to choose again?" Martin turned sharply toward Mrs. Kingston, his expression unreadable. "This time," he said, voice low and final, "I choose them." The room gasped. Mrs. Kingston's eyes widened in disbelief. "You would throw away everything, your inheritance, your name, for her?" "No," he said firmly, "I'm throwing away the lies that cost me everything I truly wanted." His gaze returned to Romana, his voice trembling but strong. "Let me make it right." The words lingered in the air, fragile yet powerful, as the chandelier light flickered above them. Romana's tears glistened like broken stars as she looked at him, at the man who had finally seen the truth too late, but maybe not late enough to change everything. The twins held onto her tightly, their little hearts sensing the shift in the air, and in that fragile silence between forgiveness and fury, love began to stir again. Martin's eyes, red and desperate, met hers one last time as he whispered, "Let me make it right." And somewhere deep inside her, a spark of the woman who once loved him began to flicker back to life. Romana stood at the edge of everything she had fought to protect, her heart, her peace, her pride, while the man who once broke it all apart now stood quietly before her, his eyes soft but burning with something fierce and real. The words, "Let me make it right," still echoed in her mind like a haunting melody, and though part of her wanted to believe him, another part of her whispered that she couldn't afford another heartbreak. The days that followed were a blur of hesitation and haunting memories, yet Martin didn't vanish this time. He didn't retreat behind the walls of his wealth or pride. Instead, he came back every single day. Each morning, just as the city stretched awake, his car would pull up near their modest apartment building, its engine purring softly in the dawn light. He never demanded entry. He just waited, sometimes with 2 cups of coffee and that uncertain smile that made her chest ache. Sometimes she ignored him, sometimes she accepted the coffee in silence, and sometimes she watched from the window, pretending not to care, but deep down, she did. One morning, Leo burst into the living room, his voice bright with excitement. "Mama! He's here again, the man with the funny tie." Romana's lips twitched despite herself, trying not to smile. She went to the window and saw Martin outside, holding a small box wrapped neatly in blue paper. Inside, as she later found out, were toy cars for the twins and a handwritten note that simply said, "For every birthday I missed." That simple gesture chipped away at her walls faster than any apology could. Slowly, without meaning to, she began to see not the CEO, not the man who broke her heart, but the father who had been robbed of his children and was now fighting desperately to earn his place in their lives. He came by after work, helping Leo fix his toy drone, teaching Jack to play chess, and once even cooking dinner for them in her tiny kitchen, an image so tender that it made her heart ache with dangerous warmth. The twins loved him instantly, their innocent laughter filling the apartment with a sound Romana hadn't heard in years. She wanted to resist it, to remind herself of the pain, but every time she saw Martin kneel beside their sons with genuine affection in his eyes, her resolve weakened. He wasn't the same man he used to be. He was gentler now, humbler, haunted by regret, yet driven by love. One evening, Romana found herself watching him from the kitchen doorway as he sat on the floor, letting the boys pile toy blocks on his head while he pretended to be a castle. Leo's giggle echoed like sunlight, and Jack's small hands tried to steady the tower. For a fleeting moment, she imagined what life might have been like if none of it had gone wrong, if the lies hadn't torn them apart. And for the first time in years, her heart dared to dream. Martin caught her watching and smiled, a slow, tender smile that made her breath hitch. "You're staring," he teased softly, and she turned away, cheeks flushed. "Don't flatter yourself," she said, but her voice lacked its usual bite. Over the following weeks, something shifted. The tension between them softened into familiarity, into laughter shared over burnt pancakes and playful arguments about bedtime. Martin had a natural way with the boys. His presence filled the small apartment with warmth that money could never buy, and yet Romana kept her guard up, even when her eyes betrayed her. One night, after putting the twins to bed, she found him standing by the window, staring out at the city lights. The rain outside painted streaks of silver down the glass, and his reflection looked tired but peaceful. "You should go," she said quietly, wrapping her arms around herself. He turned, his eyes meeting hers with an honesty that disarmed her. "You know I can't," he said softly. "Every time I walk away, I feel like I'm leaving half my heart behind." Romana's breath caught, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the rain tapping against the window and the steady rhythm of her heartbeat echoing in her ears. He took a cautious step closer, his voice a low murmur. "I was drunk that night, Romana," he confessed, his tone heavy with regret. "But I remember every second. The way you looked at me like I was more than my name. The way your voice trembled when you said my name back. I never forgot the warmth I felt holding you." She closed her eyes, the memories rushing back with painful clarity, the flicker of candlelight, the way his laughter had melted her fears, the way she had believed, just for one night, that love could bridge worlds. "Martin," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you can't just come back and act like everything's fine." "I'm not acting," he said quietly, his hand lifting as if to touch her but stopping midway. "I'm trying. I can't undo the past, Romana, but I can be here now. Let me earn you back." Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. Every word he spoke cracked the walls she'd spent years building. She wanted to scream, to tell him it was too late, but instead, all that came out was a broken whisper. "You don't get to just walk back into my life and make me feel again." His voice softened even more. "I'm not walking back in. I'm asking you to let me stay." The silence stretched between them like a held breath, full of everything they couldn't say. The rain outside grew heavier, the city fading into a blur of silver and light. Then he took that final step forward and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. The touch was light, reverent, like he was afraid she'd vanish if he pressed too hard. "I'll spend every day proving that I'm not the man who hurt you," he murmured. Her pulse raced, her knees weak as his hand lingered against her cheek. "You don't have to forgive me yet," he whispered. "Just let me try." Romana's lips parted, words caught somewhere between resistance and longing. "Martin." His name came out like a sigh, a memory, a prayer. The air between them burned, heavy with desire and unspoken emotion. Her heart screamed at her to step back, to remember the pain, but her body leaned forward, betraying her. The soft glow of the streetlights framed them in a halo of gold, and for the first time in 6 years, the world felt still. His thumb brushed against her jaw, the warmth of his skin igniting something she thought had died long ago. "You're shaking," he murmured. "Because you confuse me," she whispered back. "Because you make me want to believe again." Martin's breath mingled with hers, their eyes locked in silent confession, the years of distance melting in the space of a heartbeat. She leaned closer, drawn by the gravity of everything left unsaid, her pulse fluttering as his gaze dropped to her lips. And then, just as the fragile tension tipped towards something beautiful, a sharp knock shattered the moment. Both froze. The door creaked open, and the rain-soaked silhouette of Mrs. Kingston stood there, her face pale, her eyes cold and unreadable. Romana's breath hitched as Martin stiffened beside her. The warmth in the room vanished like a dying flame. Mrs. Kingston's voice cut through the silence like ice. "I warned you, Martin," she said softly, dangerously, "but you never listen." And in that single chilling moment, Romana realized their love story was about to face its greatest test yet. The storm that had been brewing between love and legacy finally erupted the moment Mrs. Kingston's cold silhouette filled the doorway. The golden warmth of the apartment, the lingering tenderness in the air, everything froze beneath the frost of her presence. Rainwater dripped from her expensive coat, forming tiny puddles on the floor, yet she stood tall, her chin raised in aristocratic defiance. Her voice cracked through the silence like a whip. "You're destroying our family's name, Martin," she spat, eyes burning with disdain. "That woman doesn't belong with us." She never did. The venom in her tone made Romana's stomach twist, but before she could speak, Martin moved, swiftly, protectively, stepping in front of her like a shield. His entire posture screamed defiance, his jaw tight with the kind of fury only love could summon. "Enough," he said, his voice low but sharp as steel. "Mother, she's not that woman. She's Romana. She's the mother of my children. She's my future." His words hit like thunder. Mrs. Kingston blinked, taken aback by his tone, as though she was hearing her son's voice for the first time in years. Not the obedient heir she molded, but the man who had finally found his soul. Romana's breath caught as she watched him. The same man who once bowed to his mother's every demand, now standing tall, unyielding, and utterly hers in spirit. Mrs. Kingston's lips trembled, her face tightening into anger. "You've lost your mind," she hissed. "Do you know what this will cost you? The company, your reputation, everything your father built?" Martin's reply came without hesitation. "If protecting my family costs me everything, then so be it. I won't lose them again." The sincerity in his voice sent shivers through Romana. She could barely recognize this version of him. The man who stood before her was no longer trapped in the golden cage of expectations. He was free, fierce, and entirely hers. Mrs. Kingston took a step forward, glaring at Romana with venom that could curdle blood. "You bewitched him," she accused. "You used those children to trap him, didn't you?" Romana's fingers clenched at her sides, her heart hammering in her chest, but she refused to cower. Her voice was calm, steady. "I didn't need to trap anyone, Mrs. Kingston. Martin came here on his own." That simple truth silenced the room. For the first time, Mrs. Kingston faltered, her eyes darting between her son and the woman she had once discarded. "Martin," she started, her voice suddenly fragile. "You're making a mistake. That woman. She'll ruin you." But Martin only shook his head slowly, his gaze unwavering. "No, Mother. You did that when you tore us apart 5 years ago, when you threw her out and never let me see what you were hiding from me." His words were like daggers, each one slicing through the lies that had bound them all for years. Romana felt tears prick her eyes, but this time they weren't of pain, they were of vindication. He finally knew, he finally saw her. Mrs. Kingston's fury returned with venomous strength. "You'll regret this, Martin," she hissed, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear. "You're throwing away everything for her." Martin's jaw clenched, his eyes dark but blazing with conviction. "The only thing I regret," he said, his voice shaking with raw emotion, "is letting your cruelty tear my family apart once." Silence fell like thunder after lightning, and for a moment no one dared to move. The twins, hidden behind the curtain, peeked through with wide, tearful eyes. Leo whispered softly, "Daddy's brave," and Jack clung to his brother's hand, nodding with pride. That tiny whisper seemed to echo through Martin's heart, fueling his resolve. Mrs. Kingston noticed the children then, 2 little mirrors of her son, their eyes reflecting innocence and truth. The sight broke her for a fleeting second, though pride quickly rebuilt her mask. They may carry your blood, she said coldly, but they'll never carry our name. Romana's hand flew to her mouth, hurt slicing through her like glass, but Martin turned sharply toward his mother, eyes blazing. Then to hell with our name, he snapped. If a name means choosing pride over love, then I want no part of it. Mrs. Kingston gasped as though he had struck her. For years, she had believed she could control him with legacy and power, but now her son had chosen something far stronger, love. Mrs. Kingston's lips quivered. I built this family with sacrifice, she said quietly, almost pleading. Your father would be ashamed. No, Martin cut in sharply. He'd be proud that I finally became my own man. He turned to Romana then, and the look in his eyes made her knees weak. The storm outside raged, wind howling through the slightly open window, but in that small, charged space, time seemed to still. Martin reached for her hand, his grip warm and sure, grounding her in the chaos. His eyes softened, shimmering with emotion. I spent years living someone else's version of who I was supposed to be, he said, but every time I looked into Leo and Jack's faces, I saw the truth. You're my real life, Romana. You're my home. Her breath trembled, tears spilling down her cheeks, despite her efforts to hold them back. The twins ran forward, wrapping their tiny arms around their parents' legs as though sealing a silent promise of unity. Martin looked down at them, then back at her, his gaze full of unspoken devotion. Let me fix this, he whispered, not with words, but with forever. Romana stared into his eyes, searching for hesitation, for doubt, but there was none. Only love, burning bright and relentless. The thunder outside rolled like applause as he sank to one knee, his hand still gripping hers. Romana, he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. I've spent half my life chasing wealth, approval, and empty things that mean nothing. But now, I just want you, us, our boys, our future. Marry me. The room fell silent, the world holding its breath. Mrs. Kingston gasped, stepping back, her authority crumbling before her eyes. Romana's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears, her tears glistening in the low light. The twins looked up at her, their little faces glowing with hope. For a heartbeat, everything hung in the balance, love and legacy, pride and forgiveness. Martin's eyes didn't waver, his thumb brushing gently over her trembling fingers as he whispered again, softer this time, Marry me, Romana. Let me give you the life you were always meant to have. And as the rain poured harder outside, the question lingered in the air, trembling with emotion, love, and the promise of a brand new beginning. The rain that had once witnessed their heartbreak now softened into a gentle drizzle, blessing the day with a shimmer of renewal as dawn painted the sky in tender hues of gold and rose. The city buzzed quietly beyond the mansion gates, but inside, time moved differently, slower, gentler. As if the world itself wanted to savor the moment, two hearts finally became one. Romana stood before the mirror, her reflection almost unrecognizable. The woman staring back wasn't the trembling maid who had once been thrown into the storm. She was a woman reborn, graceful, unyielding, and glowing with a peace she had earned drop by drop through every tear she had shed. Her gown was simple, a soft cream silk that floated around her like mist, and her natural curls framed her face with effortless elegance. Leo and Jack ran about in little matching suits, their laughter echoing through the hallways like the sweetest melody, occasionally stopping to pluck petals from the baskets they clutched too tightly. "Mama, you look like a princess," Leo said breathlessly, and Romana knelt down, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "No," she whispered with a smile. "I look like your mother who's about to marry your father." The mention of their father made both boys giggle, and just as Romana stood, the door opened. There he was. Martin Kingston, tall and devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made the air between them tremble. For a long, quiet moment, he simply looked at her, as if memorizing her every detail, afraid she might vanish like a dream if he blinked. "You've always been my strength, Romana," he murmured, taking her hands gently, his lips brushing against her knuckles in reverence. "Even when I didn't deserve your love, you gave it to me in silence." Her eyes softened. "And even when I wanted to hate you, my heart wouldn't let me." He smiled, one of those rare, genuine smiles that reached his eyes. "Then let's never waste another second on hate." The ceremony was quiet, intimate, almost sacred. No extravagant chandeliers or lavish crowds, just them, their children, and a handful of close friends who had watched their journey from pain to peace. The faint scent of roses drifted through the air, candles flickered along the aisle, and as Romana walked toward Martin, every step carried the weight of her past and the promise of her future. When the officiant finally said, "You may now kiss the bride," Martin didn't hesitate. He cupped her face with trembling hands, his eyes glistening, and kissed her with a tenderness that broke every invisible chain between them. It wasn't a kiss of passion alone, it was apology, devotion, redemption, and love, all wrapped in one. The room erupted into soft applause, but Romana barely heard it. Her world was him, his warmth, his breath, his heart beating against hers. Their sons cheered, tossing petals into the air as laughter filled the once solemn mansion that had witnessed so much pain. Mrs. Kingston stood in the back, silent, her expression unreadable, but her eyes shimmered with something she hadn't felt in years: remorse. Later that evening, beneath a canopy of twinkling lights in their backyard, the celebration continued. Martin had insisted on a quiet dinner at home rather than an extravagant reception. "Our love doesn't need to prove itself to the world," he'd said. "It already survived it." The air buzzed with laughter and music as Leo and Jack danced clumsily around their parents, while Romana's heart swelled watching them. Martin leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear. "You've made me a better man, Romana," he whispered. "I don't want a day to pass without showing you how deeply I love you." She turned to face him, eyes glistening. "Then show me," she murmured, her voice a mix of challenge and affection. His answer was a slow, breathtaking kiss that sent shivers through her soul. The candles flickered in the night breeze as though blessing them, and the world outside faded into nothingness. Later, when the guests had gone and the house had grown quiet, they stood by the window, watching the rain begin again. "Remember this sound?" Martin asked softly. "The night you left, the rain sounded angry. But tonight, it sounds forgiving." Romana smiled faintly, leaning against his chest. "That's because we learned to forgive ourselves." He turned her face toward his, brushing his thumb across her lips. "Romana," he breathed, his voice low and full of yearning, "I want tonight to erase every memory of pain I caused you." Her pulse raced as his lips found hers again, and they sank into each other's arms, slow and tender, their movements full of rediscovered passion. The candles glowed low, the world outside blurred, and their love, once broken and buried, came alive again, fierce and gentle all at once. The night was a symphony of heartbeats and sighs, of whispered apologies turned into promises. He held her as though she were sacred, his hands memorizing the curves of her soul rather than just her body. "You're not my mistake," he whispered against her skin. "You're my redemption." Her eyes filled with tears, and she whispered back, "And you're my peace." When dawn finally crept through the curtains, the golden light painted them in warmth, two souls who had finally come home to each other. The mansion that had once been a prison of pride was now filled with laughter, the twins' giggles echoing through the hallways as they played with their toy airplanes. Romana stood in the doorway, a mug of coffee in her hand, watching Martin chase the boys around the room, his laughter unrestrained. It was a sight she thought she'd never see, a family, whole and happy. But as she turned toward the sound of a soft knock, her heart paused. Standing at the doorway was Mrs. Kingston, her once proud shoulders slightly slumped, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. The air grew still, the cheerful noise behind Romana fading into silence. Mrs. Kingston took a shaky breath and whispered, "Romana, may I come in?" The words carried both years of guilt and the fragile hope of forgiveness. Romana stared, torn between the memories of cruelty and the faint spark of compassion rising in her chest. The woman who had thrown her into the storm now stood before her in surrender, and as Romana's fingers tightened around her mug, the world held its breath, waiting to see whether love would be strong enough to heal even this final wound. The air was still that morning, thick with the scent of coffee, rain, and something unspoken, a strange calm that followed years of chaos. The knock on the door still echoed faintly in Romana's ears as she opened it, her heartbeat uneven. Mrs. Kingston stood there, not as the proud matriarch of the Kingston Empire, but as an aging mother, fragile and stripped of the armor she had once worn like a crown. Her silk scarf was slightly misplaced, her once perfect posture softened by guilt, and her trembling fingers clutched the handle of her purse as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. Her voice cracked the silence. "Romana," she whispered, barely audible. "I was wrong. So terribly wrong." The words hung heavy in the doorway, shattering something invisible yet real. For a long, aching moment, Romana didn't move. Her mind replayed the cruel command that had once broken her, "Get out of my house, you filthy maid," and the rain-soaked night that had followed. The humiliation, the loneliness, the fear of raising 2 children on her own. All of it burned behind her eyes, but as she looked at the old woman trembling before her, she didn't see the tyrant anymore. She saw a mother who had lost her son's trust, a grandmother who had missed 6 precious years, a woman now shackled by her own remorse. Romana's lips parted, her voice soft but firm. "Why now?" Mrs. Kingston swallowed hard, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Because I saw it. I saw what love looks like when it's real." She took a hesitant step forward. "And I realized I've spent my life protecting our name instead of protecting my family." Behind Romana, the twins peeked from the living room, their laughter fading as they saw the stranger from their mother's stories, the grandmother they had never met. Mrs. Kingston's knees wobbled, and before Romana could stop her, she sank to the floor, kneeling before her grandsons with trembling grace. "Can you forgive me?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Leo hesitated for a moment, his young mind processing the weight of her words, and then he did something so pure it made Romana's heart ache. He reached forward and wrapped his tiny arms around her. "It's okay, Grandma," he said softly. Jack followed, his small hand patting hers gently. "Yeah, you can still come to our soccer game if you want." Mrs. Kingston's breath hitched, her tears falling freely now, and for the first time in years, the marble-hearted matriarch of the Kingston family wept not from pride, but from love. Martin appeared behind Romana, silent but watchful. His expression softened as he took in the scene, his mother on the floor, his children wrapped around her, and the woman he loved standing like the calm after a storm. He stepped forward, his voice low but steady. "Mother," he said quietly, "you don't have to kneel." Mrs. Kingston looked up, her mascara smudged, her lips trembling. "No, Martin," she said, shaking her head. "I do. It took me 6 years to understand what I destroyed, and it will take the rest of my life to make it right." Romana felt something shift inside her chest, an old pain unraveling, a piece of her heart finally letting go. She knelt too, meeting the older woman at eye level. "You hurt me," Romana whispered, her voice trembling but honest. But holding on to hate would only keep me trapped in the past. Her hand hesitated for just a heartbeat. Then she placed it gently over Mrs. Kingston's. So, yes, I forgive you. The room seemed to exhale with them, as if even the walls had been waiting for this moment. Mrs. Kingston's shoulders shook with quiet sobs as Romana's forgiveness washed over her like light breaking through the clouds. Martin closed his eyes briefly, relief flooding through him. The twins giggled softly, their innocence dissolving what remained of the tension. And just like that, what had once been a house divided by pride became a home woven together by love. Later that evening, as the rain began again outside, Martin stood by the fireplace with Romana in his arms, his voice low and full of awe. "You made me whole again," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You made all of us whole again." She smiled through tears, her gaze drifting to the twins, who were fast asleep on the couch, and then to the older woman sitting quietly nearby, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "No, Martin," she said softly. "Love did that." The flickering firelight bathed them in gold, turning the moment into something almost eternal. Martin tilted her chin up gently and kissed her, slow and tender, a kiss that sealed not just their love, but the healing of every broken piece between them. Mrs. Kingston turned her head, watching them with a bittersweet smile, the kind that comes when a heart too heavy for too long finally learns how to breathe again. "You were right, Romana," she whispered to herself. "Love is stronger than pride." Morning arrived quietly, with sunlight spilling through the wide windows of the Kingston mansion. The same marble floors that had once echoed with cruel words now felt warm beneath Romana's feet as she walked hand in hand with Martin, their children running ahead, their laughter bouncing off the walls. The portraits that once sneered down now looked strangely gentle in the morning glow, as though the house itself had been reborn. In the kitchen, Mrs. Kingston was already preparing breakfast, humming softly to herself. The sight stunned Romana. It was almost surreal. "I thought I'd make pancakes," the older woman said with a small smile. "Leo said they're his favorite." Romana's eyes softened. "They are," she said. "Thank you." "No," Mrs. Kingston replied quietly, glancing toward her grandchildren. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." Romana turned toward Martin, who leaned casually against the counter, his tie slightly loosened, that boyish grin she loved playing at his lips. "See," he whispered, "even miracles like pancakes can happen in this house now." She laughed softly, the sound wrapping around the room like sunlight. That night, when the house fell quiet again, Romana stood on the balcony, gazing at the stars. Martin came up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist as he whispered, "You know, 6 years ago, I thought I'd lost everything." She leaned back into his chest, her voice serene. "And now?" He smiled, kissing her temple. "Now, I've got everything I never knew I needed." She turned in his arms, her eyes glimmering. "You're not the only one who found a new beginning." They stood there together, the moonlight glinting off the wedding ring that symbolized everything they had endured: betrayal, pain, love, redemption. In that moment, Romana realized something profound. She was no longer defined by the night she was cast out, but by the love that brought her back. The mansion behind her was no longer a place of judgment. It was a home filled with laughter, forgiveness, and light. Her sons slept peacefully. Her husband's arms held her close, and even the woman who had once cursed her name now prayed for her happiness. The story that began in tears had ended in grace. The woman once thrown out returned as the heartbeat of the Kingston family, and this time no one could ever take her place again. And that, my dear listeners, was today's heart-melting story, a journey of love, pain and redemption that proves true love always finds its way back. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to Beyond Color Stories, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another emotional roller coaster like this one. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from, and what part of this story moved you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Until the next story, stay kind, stay in love, and remember, every heart has a story worth telling. This is Beyond Color Stories, signing off with love.